A new poll from Emerson shows that not only is Bernie Sanders the frontrunner for the Democratic primary, but it also shows that around 20% of his supporters would rather vote for Donald Trump if Bernie Sanders isn't chosen as the nominee. It would seem Bernie or bust is back with a vengeance. Because back in 2016, it was reported around 12% of Bernie's supporters decided to vote for Donald Trump. And this report actually offended many people who are on the far left and who supported Bernie Sanders. The insinuation that they had anything in common with Donald Trump is rather offensive, and this was highlighted recently by comments made by Pete Buttigieg. But in reality, what people on the left and the right might not realize is that they're independent voters that are more concerned with our manufacturing base, jobs, and immigration. And left or right isn't as important as these core issues. Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump were both very strong on these issues. In fact, at a rally, Bernie Sanders recently said Donald Trump isn't going far enough to protect American jobs from the North American Free Trade Agreement. Today, let's take a look at the latest polls and the reports that show Bernie Sanders voters may flip for Donald Trump and secure him a 2020 victory. But before we get started, make sure you're following me over on Minds at minds.com/Timcast. I'm hoping to break 100,000 subscribers, and I need your support to do it. But more importantly, we are using these big tech oligopoly censorious platforms, so it's very, very important you guys follow me somewhere where I'm substantially less likely to be censored. And that's over at minds.com/Timcast. Now, if you want to support this video, just share it on social media to help spread the news. Our first story from Telesur: 20% Bernie supporters won't vote for Dems if he loses the primary. Now, it's important to point out that Telesur is partially funded by the Venezuelan government, but I'm using this source specifically to highlight concerns of the far left over the thought that Bernie supporters might actually support Trump instead. The story says, a new Emerson poll discovered that almost 20% of supporters of second-time presidential candidate Senator Bernie Sanders would vote for the United States President Donald Trump during the 2020 presidential election if Sanders doesn't win the primaries. The poll also showed that Sanders is ahead of former Vice President Joe Biden, who has been accused of harassment by multiple women. Almost 29% of respondents want Bernie to win, and 24% want Biden. If South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg won the primary, 21% of Sanders supporters would vote for Trump, whereas 26% said they would do the same if Elizabeth Warren wins, 18% if Beto O'Rourke wins, and 17% said the same would happen if Kamala Harris wins the primary. On the contrary, all of Buttigieg's supporters said they would vote for Sanders if he won the primary. Almost all of Warren's, 94%, Harris's, 98%, and O'Rourke's, 91% supporters said the same thing. Of all the supporters of the top Democratic candidates, Buttigieg's gave Trump the lowest approval rating at 0%. Many of his supporters, i.e. 43%, are also most likely to identify as independents. Bernie or bust wasn't about supporting Trump. For the most part, it was either Bernie or bust. If Bernie Sanders isn't the nominee in 2016, people said they just wouldn't vote. But it was reported around 12% of voters who supported Bernie decided to vote for Donald Trump. And I think this shows just how important the trade agreements and manufacturing was. In 2015, Bernie Sanders said no open borders. As I mentioned earlier at a rally, Bernie Sanders says Trump isn't going far enough. In fact, the World Socialist website accused Bernie Sanders of being a right-wing nationalist for suggesting that American jobs should be kept for Americans. In a story from the World Socialist website, April 15th, it says Bernie Sanders silent on Assange, vocal in promoting nationalism at Michigan rally. The story concluded by saying Sanders' silent support for the persecution of Assange and his promotion of nationalism arise from his pro-capitalist, pro-imperialist political orientation. These right-wing positions demonstrate that his real aim is not, as he claims, to lead a political revolution against the billionaire class, but to misdirect, disorient, and suppress opposition among workers and young people by channeling it behind the corporate-controlled pro-war Democratic Party. I'm not saying you should take the World Socialist website seriously. Many people have called them out as being a fringe website that don't really represent Bernie Sanders' base. But the point I'm trying to highlight is that there are many people on the left who view Bernie Sanders as holding right-wing positions and being pro-nationalist. Regardless of what you think about Bernie, he has denounced open borders several times, even recently, and he has defended the workers in this country. He opposed the Trans-Pacific Partnership and NAFTA. That means there are many people in this country who are probably apolitical, political independents, when given the choice said, look, I'm either going to vote for Bernie or Trump. And when Bernie lost, they said, I'm going to vote the other direction. But it is true also that many Bernie voters, a lot of them, absolutely just didn't vote. In a story from Forbes, they say only 51% of current Bernie supporters actually voted in the 2016 general election for the Democratic nominee. Hillary Clinton, 7% voted for Trump, 23% voted for a third-party candidate, and 19% did not vote. This result is the most difficult to interpret because nearly 30% of those who currently support Bernie say they voted for Trump or a third-party candidate in 2016. This statistic could support the claim that Bernie has crossover appeal and can expand on what Hillary was able to do in 2016. If 19% of non-voters now say they would go to the polls for Bernie, it would support the narrative that Bernie can motivate many more people to go out and vote for a Democrat in 2020. If we take these potential voters at their word, it would appear to be a good sign for Bernie. On the other hand, can we know for sure that such voters will actually pull the lever for Bernie in 2020? Given that they were the same voters who, in 2016, were convinced to switch their vote to Trump or a third-party candidate, or convinced to not vote at all. Through the slog of negative advertising and attacks that will take place over the next 18 months in the run-up to the presidential election, perhaps many of the current Bernie supporters will not actually remain motivated Bernie supporters until the end. Only time will tell. What's absolutely fascinating about this story is that they're saying the poll shows nearly 30% of those who currently support Bernie say they voted for Trump or a third-party candidate. Those numbers are way higher than what was reported back in 2016. This story from the Washington Post says, how many Sanders voters voted for Donald Trump? Two surveys estimate that 12% of Sanders voters voted for Trump. A third survey suggests it was 6%. So there's a lot to interpret here, but as it seems, the original numbers given were around 12%. NPR reported as 1 in 10 Bernie voters supported Donald Trump. If we're hearing today that around 30% of the people supporting Bernie Sanders voted for Donald Trump, it could mean one of two things. Many more people who supported Bernie actually supported Trump, or Trump is actually losing some of his support to Bernie Sanders. Suffice it to say, though, 20% or so of Bernie Sanders' current voters would rather vote for Donald Trump, and that's according to the exact same poll. Of course, Democrats are taking notice. From Bloomberg, Bernie or bust voters create predicament for Democrats in 2020. The story says the fierce loyalty Bernie Sanders inspires in his supporters is creating a dilemma for the Democrats. For a sliver of Sanders' base, it's Bernie or bust. They may detest President Donald Trump, but they didn't vote for Hillary Clinton, and they're not sure they'll back the Democratic nominee in 2020 if Sanders isn't on the ballot. They're willing to do whatever it takes to push the party to adopt his ideas. Sometimes things have to get ugly before they get better, said Melissa Moliber, a 46-year-old social worker who attended Sanders' rally in Pittsburgh on Sunday. There's such a thing as necessary evils in life to restore the balance. Maliber said she cast a write-in vote for Sanders in 2016 rather than go along with a Democratic establishment choice who wouldn't take bold action on issues like healthcare and climate change. People had to wake up, she said. If we had another Clinton in office, what would we have changed? And once again, I want to make sure I highlight the stat from Forbes. Only 51% of current Bernie supporters actually voted in the 2016 general election. And that can mean a lot of things. It could mean that Bernie Sanders has many new supporters, people who didn't vote, maybe young people who are just now old enough to vote, or it could mean that Bernie or bust had a significant impact on the election. As we just heard from that quote, that woman said Trump is a necessary evil because Clinton wouldn't have changed anything. Perhaps it's true that many people went Bernie or bust. However, this story from the Washington Examiner is also painting another terrifying picture for Democrats. Yang, Buttigieg, Bernie, or bust. The Yang gang wants an outsider for president in 2020. The narrative seems rather clear, and it's something I have said over and over again. The Democrats will not be able to form a coalition to defeat Donald Trump. People want their candidate. People who like Yang want Yang. People who want Buttigieg. People who want Bernie. They're not willing to support other Democrats. The Democrats are just too fractured. Their ideology is all over the place. And to make it worse, the crux of the story is that Bernie Sanders voters would rather support Trump. That means if Trump gets those Bernie voters, he's gonna win. He's gonna win 2020. Of course, left-wing activists cannot believe it. They can't accept it, and we see stories like this from April 12th. Here's how the Bernie or bust crowd was manipulated by the Kremlin in 2016. That's an argument. Tell the actual people who are looking for sound policy on trade agreements and immigration that they were tricked by the Kremlin. That'll make them support Bernie Sanders. The story concludes by saying the Russian government manipulated 2016 and they'll inevitably strike again. Therefore, Democratic candidates must work together and support each other to defend against these threats. We also see the article saying, no, the story about Bernie's voters are out of context, and you need to question the poll itself. Because unfortunately, it seems like many people just can't accept the fact that there are independent voters in this country and that the situation is nuanced. Too many of these people live on Twitter. They are pushed into one of the extreme camps. They believe that's all anyone wants. And meanwhile, in reality, you have a middle-aged dad who's got 2 kids who says, how do I get my son and daughter into the best school? How do I save for retirement? They don't care about your woke battle. They don't care about the culture war. They care about bringing jobs back. They care about a good salary. They care about taking care of their family. When Bernie Sanders steps up at a rally recently and says Trump isn't going far enough, that's what they hear. When Donald Trump steps up and says we need to protect the working class in these manufacturing-based regions, that's what they hear. When Kirsten Gillibrand steps up and says the future is female, no one is paying attention. When Bernie Sanders steps up and talks about protecting our jobs against open borders immigration, that's what workers hear. They're independent. They're less concerned about left or right and more concerned about you fighting for their chance at survival and bettering their lives. Too many people are caught up in the muck. Too many of these Democrats are supporting a Green New Deal, and the unions oppose it. What do you think the people in Middle America who are going to vote for this president are thinking? They don't care about your culture war. They don't care about the far left or far right. They just care about making life better for their families. And if the Democrats don't pay attention to that, they will not win. So I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what this means. All I know is if Bernie doesn't win, Trump's definitely going to win. But I guess at the same time, Bernie, in my opinion, is not going to beat Donald Trump, but I could be wrong. I gotta say, it'd be a hell of an upset if Bernie wins the nomination and then, sure enough, Donald Trump loses. But of course, we can't count out Joe Biden. He has establishment support. He's yet to announce, but he is lining up the donors. And if Joe Biden steps in and wins that nomination, it will be Trump 2020 landslide. Don't forget, there are many forecast models, including a story from Politico saying that he's lining up a landslide victory. The economy is great, and he has the incumbent power, so we'll see what happens. But let me know what you think in the comments below. We will keep the conversation going. Are you a former Bernie supporter? Do you know any Bernie supporters who flipped for Donald Trump? You can comment below. Stay tuned. New videos every day at 4 p.m. Eastern. I'll have more videos on my second channel, youtube.com/TimCastNews, starting at 6 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all next time.